My name is Linda, and I'm 28 years old. Right now, I'm standing in my luxury penthouse overlooking the city, holding an old family photo from what feels like a lifetime ago. I used to believe that family meant everything, that blood was thicker than water, that the people who shared your DNA would always have your back. 3 years ago, my brother looked me straight in the eye and said words that would change everything. My mother, the woman who gave birth to me, simply nodded in agreement. That moment shattered my world, but it also freed me to build something incredible. Today, I'm worth millions, and guess who's calling? Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories that'll make you believe in the power of turning pain into purpose. Trust me, what happened next will show you exactly why sometimes the worst betrayal becomes your greatest blessing. Growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, I thought I understood my place in the world. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house on Maple Street, the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other's business and Sunday dinners were sacred. My father passed away when I was 12, leaving my mother Margaret to raise my older brother Dennis and me on her own. She worked double shifts at the local hospital as a nurse, always exhausted but determined to keep us afloat. Dennis was 4 years older than me, and from the moment Dad died, he became the golden child. He was everything I wasn't. 6 feet tall, broad shoulders, captain of the football team, and somehow managed to pull straight A's without breaking a sweat. Teachers loved him, neighbors praised him, and Mom, well, she practically worshipped the ground he walked on. Dennis was her pride and joy, her proof that she was doing something right as a single mother. I was the opposite in every way that mattered to my family. Small for my age, quiet, and struggling with dyslexia that nobody really understood back then. While Dennis was scoring touchdowns, I was hiding in the library, losing myself in art books and sketching in notebooks I kept secret. My teachers saw my reading difficulties as laziness. My mother saw them as disappointment. Every parent-teacher conference ended the same way, with Mom asking why I couldn't be more like Dennis. The favoritism wasn't subtle. When Dennis graduated high school, Mom threw him a massive party and bought him a brand new red Camaro, with money she'd been saving for years. When I graduated 2 years later, I got a card with $20 inside and a lecture about needing to be more responsible. Dennis got full financial support for his business degree at Ohio State. I worked 3 jobs washing dishes, cleaning offices, and stocking shelves just to afford community college for my art degree. After college, Dennis moved back home rent-free, while he looked for the perfect job opportunity. He had his old room, home-cooked meals, and Mom's undivided attention. I rented a tiny studio apartment above a pizza shop, working retail at the local art supply store, barely making ends meet. Every Sunday dinner became a showcase for Dennis's latest accomplishments and my latest failures. The worst part wasn't the obvious favoritism. It was watching Dennis take credit for ideas that came from our childhood conversations, presenting them as his own brilliant insights during family gatherings. When I'd try to speak up, Mom would give me that look that said I was being petty and jealous. Dennis would just smile, that charming smile that made everyone forget I'd said anything at all. When Mom had her first health scare, a minor heart episode that landed her in the hospital for 3 days, I started coming around more often. I thought maybe this was my chance to rebuild our relationship, to show her I cared just as much as Dennis did. I brought her flowers, sat with her during treatment, and listened to her fears about getting older. For a brief moment, I believed things might finally change between us. Working at Patterson Art Supplies taught me more than any business class ever could. I spent my days helping local artists, teachers, and hobbyists find exactly what they needed for their projects. What struck me was how many customers complained about the same thing. The art supplies were either too expensive, poor quality, or loaded with chemicals that made people sick. Parents worried about their kids using toxic materials. Professional artists couldn't afford eco-friendly alternatives. Teachers wanted safer options for their classrooms but were stuck with whatever fit their tight budgets. I started researching during my lunch breaks and evenings. I discovered there was a huge gap in the market for affordable, high-quality, environmentally safe art supplies. The existing eco-friendly brands were either ridiculously expensive or hard to find. The affordable options were full of harmful chemicals. There had to be a middle ground, a way to create sustainable art materials that regular people could actually afford. For 6 months, I threw myself into research. I contacted manufacturers, studied supply chains, learned about sustainable materials, and developed detailed cost projections. I created spreadsheets showing potential profit margins, identified target markets, and even designed preliminary packaging concepts. This wasn't just a daydream anymore. This was a real business opportunity with serious potential. I was excited in a way I hadn't felt since childhood. Finally, I had something that could prove my worth to my family. This wasn't about art or creativity, things they'd never valued. This was about business, money, success, all the things that mattered to Dennis and Mom. I spent weeks perfecting my presentation, practicing my pitch, making sure every detail was bulletproof. The Sunday I decided to share my idea, I arrived at Mom's house with a folder full of research, charts, and projections. My hands were shaking as I spread everything across the dining room table. Dennis had been complaining for months about his corporate job, how unfulfilling it was, how he wanted to start his own business but couldn't find the right opportunity. This seemed perfect. Mom was intrigued. She asked thoughtful questions about startup costs, target demographics, and long-term growth potential. Dennis, initially dismissive, perked up when I showed him the profit projections. His eyes lit up when he saw the numbers, the same way they used to when he looked at his football trophies. I proposed a partnership. I had the vision, the research, and the passion. Dennis had business connections from college, experience with corporate structures, and, let's be honest, the confidence that investors would take seriously. Together, we could build something amazing. For the first time in years, I felt like I truly belonged at that dinner table. We scheduled follow-up meetings. I continued refining the business plan, while Dennis started reaching out to his network. Mom promised she'd help financially once we had a concrete proposal to present to potential investors. Those 2 weeks felt magical. We were finally working towards something together, and I foolishly believed that meant we were finally becoming the family I'd always wanted. Dennis arranged a meeting with some investors he knew from his fraternity days, guys who'd gone into venture capital and private equity. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon at a downtown conference room. I spent the previous week preparing, printing presentation materials, and rehearsing every possible question they might ask. The night before our big investor meeting, I couldn't sleep. I kept going over my presentation, double-checking every number, making sure I had answers for any concerns they might raise. This was my moment to prove that I wasn't just the family disappointment. This was my chance to show everyone, including myself, that I had real value to offer. I arrived at the office building 30 minutes early, clutching my presentation folder and a box of sample products I'd created. The conference room was on the 15th floor, all glass walls and polished mahogany. I was setting up my materials when I heard familiar laughter coming from down the hall. Dennis was already there, in a smaller conference room, talking animatedly with 3 men in expensive suits. My stomach dropped. This wasn't part of the plan. We were supposed to present together, as partners. I knocked on the door, and Dennis looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read. Surprise? Guilt? Annoyance? Linda, you're early. These are the investors I was telling you about. Guys, this is my sister Linda. She's been helping me with some of the research. Helping him with research? I had done all the research. This entire concept was mine. Before I could correct him, he continued. I was just giving them a preliminary overview. Why don't you go set up in the main conference room? We'll be right there. Something felt wrong, but I nodded and walked to the larger room. Through the glass wall, I could see Dennis showing them documents that looked suspiciously like modified versions of my business plan. My business plan. The one with my research, my ideas, my 6 months of work. When they finally joined me, the dynamic was already established. The investors, Brad, Michael, and Stuart, treated Dennis as the CEO and me as some kind of assistant. They addressed all their questions to him. When I tried to jump in with detailed answers about supply chains or manufacturing processes, they'd glance at me politely, then turn back to Dennis for confirmation. This is really impressive work, Dennis, Brad said, flipping through the presentation. The market analysis is thorough, and these profit projections look realistic. How long have you been developing this concept? About 8 months, Dennis replied without hesitation. 8 months. I'd started my research 6 months ago, and shared it with him 2 weeks ago. It's been a passion project of mine, combining my business background with my interest in environmental sustainability. I stared at him in disbelief. His interest in environmental sustainability? The man who threw aluminum cans in the regular trash and left lights on in empty rooms? I tried to speak up to correct the record, but Stuart interrupted. Dennis, what's your background in manufacturing and supply chain management? This level of detail suggests real industry experience. This was my area of expertise, the part I'd spent months researching. I opened my mouth to answer, but Dennis smoothly replied. I've been consulting with various industry experts, really diving deep into the operational side of things. Linda here has been invaluable in helping with some of the more detailed research tasks. research tasks, as if I were some intern he'd hired to make phone calls. The meeting continued for another hour, with Dennis presenting my ideas as his own while I sat there feeling smaller and smaller. When they offered him funding and partnership opportunities, barely acknowledging my presence, I felt something inside me break. After the investors left, promising to be in touch within the week, Dennis was practically glowing. That went even better than I expected. They're really interested, Linda. This could be huge for us. Us? I finally found my voice. Dennis, what the hell was that? You presented my entire business plan as your own work. You let them think this was your idea from the beginning. He had the audacity to look confused. What are you talking about? We're partners, remember? This is our idea. I never said it was only mine. You said you'd been working on it for 8 months. You said it was your passion project. You introduced me as someone who helped with research tasks, not as the person who came up with the entire concept. Linda, calm down, you're being dramatic. Look, I have the business experience and the connections these guys will trust. You're great at the creative stuff, but let's be realistic here. They need to see a leader they can invest in with confidence. That's just how the business world works. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you're saying you deserve credit for my work because you're more believable than I am? I'm saying we both contribute different strengths to this partnership. Your research was valuable, but turning research into a viable business requires skills you just don't have yet. You wouldn't have been able to handle the pressure of that presentation anyway. That's when Mom walked in. I'd called her after the meeting, upset, and needing someone to talk to. I hoped she'd help me process what had just happened. Maybe even support me in confronting Dennis about taking credit for my work. Instead, she walked into a full-blown argument between her 2 children. What's going on here? She asked, looking between us with concern. Dennis immediately shifted into damage control mode. Mom, Linda's upset because she thinks I didn't give her enough credit in the investor meeting. I tried to explain that in business you have to present a unified front, but she's not understanding how these things work. I looked at my mother, this woman who'd raised me, who I'd hoped might finally see me clearly. Mom, this entire business concept was my idea. I did all the research, I created the business plan, I found the manufacturers, and calculated all the costs. Dennis just presented it like it was his own work. Mom looked at Dennis, then back at me. I held my breath, waiting for her to ask for the full story, to demand the truth, to stand up for her daughter who'd been stolen from and lied about. Instead, she sighed. Linda, honey, Dennis has been talking about starting his own business for months. He has the education and experience for this kind of thing. Maybe you're remembering things differently because you want to be more involved than you actually were. I felt like she'd punched me in the stomach. I'm remembering things differently? Mom, I can show you all of my research, my notes, the timeline of when I developed each part of this plan. Look, Dennis interrupted, maybe we got our wires crossed about who contributed what. The important thing is that we move forward as a team. Linda, you can be involved in the creative and research side of things. I'll handle the business development and investor relations. That's what we're each good at. As if ideas and research weren't real business contributions. As if being articulate and confident mattered more than being right or original or hardworking. I looked at my mother again, hoping she'd see through his manipulation, but she was nodding along with his reasonable-sounding words. Mom suggested we have a family meeting the following Sunday to work everything out properly. She made it sound like a mediation, a chance for cooler heads to prevail and find a solution that worked for everyone. I spent the week preparing, not for another presentation, but for what I thought would be an honest conversation about fairness and respect. I arrived at the house early, hoping to talk to Mom privately before Dennis got there. I found her in the kitchen, preparing her famous pot roast, the smell filling the house with memories of better times. She seemed relaxed, almost cheerful, which gave me hope that maybe she'd spent the week thinking about what had really happened. Mom, before Dennis gets here, I want to show you something. I pulled out a folder containing my original research notes, emails with manufacturers, and early drafts of the business plan, all time-stamped and dated. I know last week was confusing, but I want you to see the timeline of how this business idea actually developed. She glanced at the papers, but didn't really look at them. Linda, sweetheart, I think you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Dennis explained everything to me. You both worked on this together, you both deserve credit, and you'll both benefit from the success. That's what family does. But Mom, it's not about working together. It's about him taking something that was mine and presenting it as his own creation. That's not collaboration, that's theft. She stopped stirring the gravy and looked at me with that familiar expression of disappointed patience. Theft? Linda, that's a very serious accusation to make about your own brother. Dennis would never steal from you. He's always looked out for you, always tried to include you in things, even when... She trailed off. But I knew what she meant, even when I didn't deserve it. Dennis arrived as she was setting the table, carrying flowers for Mom and wearing his most charming smile. He hugged her, complimented the meal, and asked about her recent doctor's appointment. The perfect son, as always. We sat down to eat, and for a few minutes, it almost felt normal. Like we were just a family having Sunday dinner. So, Mom said, cutting into her roast, I think we need to clear the air about this business situation. You're both adults, you're both family, and there's no reason you can't work this out like reasonable people. I took a deep breath. I agree, Mom. I think we need to be honest about what actually happened. Dennis, when I presented my business idea to you 2 weeks ago, you seemed genuinely interested in partnering with me. But in that investor meeting, you presented the entire concept as something you'd been working on for 8 months. That's not true, and you know it. Dennis set down his fork and looked at me with what seemed like genuine sadness. Linda, I never meant to make you feel left out or unappreciated. Maybe I got caught up in the excitement of the presentation and misspoke about the timeline. But this isn't about who had the idea first. It's about building something successful together. It's not about misspeaking, Dennis. You specifically told them it was your passion project, your months of research, your industry connections. You introduced me as someone who helped with research tasks, not as your partner or the originator of the concept. Mom was watching this exchange with growing frustration. Linda, why are you so focused on who gets credit? If this business succeeds, you'll both benefit. Isn't that what matters? Because credit matters, Mom. Because being recognized for your work and ideas matters. Because I've spent my whole life watching Dennis get praised for things while I get ignored, and now he's literally taking my work and presenting it as his own. That's when Dennis's mask slipped. His voice got harder, colder. You know what, Linda? Maybe the real problem here is that you can't handle not being the center of attention for once. You came up with an idea, congratulations. But turning an idea into a real business takes skills you don't have and connections you'll never make. So you admit it was my idea? I admit you did some research that contributed to a business plan we developed together. But let's be realistic about what happens next. Those investors aren't going to fund a venture led by someone who stocks shelves at an art store and has no business experience. They need to see leadership they can trust with their money. The words hit like physical blows. So you're saying I'm not qualified to lead a business based on my own idea? I'm saying we both know who has the better chance of making this successful. And deep down, you know it too. That's why you're so angry. Because you know I'm right. I looked at Mom, waiting for her to defend me, to point out how cruel and condescending Dennis was being. Instead, she was nodding slowly, like he was making perfect sense. Linda, she said quietly, maybe Dennis has a point. You've never run a business before. You've never managed employees or dealt with investors. These are big responsibilities, and maybe it's better if Dennis takes the lead while you contribute in other ways. I felt something fundamental shift inside me. These people, my family, truly believed I was incapable of success. Not just incapable, but so obviously inferior that they couldn't even pretend otherwise. Other ways, I repeated. Like what? Like being Dennis's research assistant? Like sitting quietly while he takes credit for my work? Dennis's patience finally snapped completely. He stood up from the table, his face flushed with anger. You want to know the truth, Linda? Fine, here's the truth. No one wants you here. You're just holding everyone back with your jealousy and your need to make everything about you. You always have been. The words hung in the air like poison. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to gasp, to scold Dennis for saying something so cruel, to defend her daughter against such vicious attack. Instead, she just nodded. A small, almost imperceptible nod, but I saw it clearly. My own mother agreed that no one wanted me there. I sat in stunned silence for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then something inside me crystallized into perfect clarity. You're right, I said quietly. No one wants me here. But that's okay. Because I don't want to be here either. I stood up from the table, my legs surprisingly steady. Dennis, you can have the business. Use my research, take credit for my ideas, impress your investor friends. Just know that you're building your success on stolen ground. Linda, don't be so dramatic, Mom started, but I cut her off. And, Mom, thank you for making it so clear where I stand in this family. I won't make the mistake of thinking I belong here again. I walked toward the door, and Dennis called after me. Where are you going? You can't just walk out every time things don't go your way. I turned back one last time. I'm not walking out, Dennis. I'm walking away. There's a difference. As I drove away from that house, tears streaming down my face, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done trying to prove myself to people who had already decided I wasn't worth their respect. I was done begging for scraps of affection from people who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. If no one wanted me there, then I'd build a life somewhere else. And I'd make damn sure it was better than anything they could imagine. I left Cleveland 3 days later with $800 in my checking account, a car that made concerning noises on highways, and 2 suitcases containing everything I owned that mattered. I'd quit my job at the art store, given notice on my tiny apartment, and pointed my car west toward Portland, Oregon. I'd read articles about Portland's thriving arts community and figured if I was going to start over, I might as well do it somewhere that appreciated creativity. The first few months were brutal. I found a room in a house with 2 other women, paying $400 a month for a space barely bigger than a closet. My roommates were both graduate students who treated me politely but distantly, like a temporary inconvenience they had to tolerate. I worked at a coffee shop in the mornings, cleaned office buildings at night, and spent my afternoons applying for every retail job I could find. But something had shifted inside me during those long hours driving across the country. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to live up to anyone else's expectations. I wasn't comparing myself to Dennis or seeking Mom's approval. I was completely, utterly alone, and somehow that felt like freedom. I started selling handmade art supplies from my kitchen table during my few free hours. Nothing fancy, just basic drawing pencils and watercolor paints I made from natural pigments I researched online. I listed them on a few websites, describing them as eco-friendly alternatives to mass-produced supplies. My first sale was $12. My second was $36. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The failures came fast and hard. My first batch of paint separated and became unusable. My website crashed because I'd chosen the cheapest hosting service available. I lost $200 on a shipment of pencils that arrived broken and unusable. There were nights I lay in my tiny room, calculating whether I could afford both groceries and rent, wondering if Dennis had been right about my inability to run a business. The lowest point came 8 months after I'd moved to Portland. I just lost a potential bulk order because my supplies hadn't arrived on time, and I was down to my last $50. In desperation, I called Mom, hoping that maybe distance and time had softened her perspective, that maybe she'd realized how wrong things had gone between us. Linda? Oh my goodness, we haven't heard from you in so long. How are you doing out there? For a moment, her warmth gave me hope. I'm struggling a bit, Mom. Starting a business is harder than I expected, and I'm barely keeping my head above water financially. Oh, honey, maybe this is a sign that you should come home. Dennis's business is doing really well. I'm sure he'd be happy to give you a job, maybe in marketing or customer service. A job. Working for Dennis, in the business built on my stolen ideas. Mom, I didn't call to ask for a job. I called because I'm your daughter, and I'm having a hard time, and I thought maybe you'd want to help me, or at least support me emotionally. Of course I support you, Linda. But, sweetie, maybe it's time to be realistic about your limitations. Not everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur. There's no shame in admitting that and finding a more stable path. After I hung up, I sat on my bed and cried for about 10 minutes. Then I dried my eyes, looked around my tiny room, and made a promise to myself. I would never again ask my family for anything. Not money, not support, not validation, nothing. From that moment forward, I was truly on my own, and I'd succeed or fail based entirely on my own efforts. That determination led to my first real breakthrough. I'd been volunteering at a local community center, teaching basic art classes to kids whose schools had cut their arts programs. The teacher who ran the after-school program, Mrs. Rodriguez, noticed that several children were having allergic reactions to the cheap art supplies the center provided. Linda, those natural supplies you make, are they safe for kids with sensitive skin? She asked one afternoon as we cleaned up after a particularly messy painting session. I explained my research into non-toxic, hypoallergenic materials, and her eyes lit up. Would you be able to make supplies for our entire program? We have about 60 kids, and I have a small budget for materials. That order led to 3 more schools in the district. Word spread among teachers about the local woman who made safe, affordable art supplies. Parents started asking where they could buy them. Local art stores began inquiring about carrying my products. 18 months after leaving Cleveland, I was finally making enough to quit my night job cleaning offices. I hired my first employee, a recent college graduate named Sarah, who understood both business and environmental sustainability. We moved operations from my kitchen to a small warehouse space in an industrial district. The breakthrough that changed everything came when a journalist from a regional environmental magazine visited our warehouse to write about local green businesses. The article, titled Art with a Conscience: How One Woman is Revolutionizing Creative Supplies, featured a photo of me surrounded by my products and included quotes about my commitment to making art accessible and safe for everyone. The morning that article was published, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. Orders poured in from across the Pacific Northwest, then California, then nationwide. Art teachers, professional artists, parents, and environmentally conscious consumers all wanted to try my products. Within a week, I had more orders than I could fulfill with my current setup. I was profitable, growing, and building something real. Something that was entirely mine, built on my own ideas, and sustained by my own determination. For the first time since leaving Cleveland, I allowed myself to feel proud of what I'd accomplished. But I had no idea that back in Ohio, Dennis's stolen business was beginning to crumble, and that the family who'd rejected me was about to face their own reckoning. 2.5 years after I'd driven away from Cleveland with $800 and a broken heart, Sustainable Arts was worth over $2 million. I'd been featured on the cover of Green Business magazine as their Young Entrepreneur of the Year. My products were sold in over 300 stores across the country, and I'd just signed a distribution deal that would bring my supplies to major art retailers nationwide. I lived in a beautiful apartment in Portland's Pearl District, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and a view of Mount Hood on clear days. I had a team of 12 employees who respected my leadership and shared my vision for making art accessible and environmentally responsible. For the first time in my life, I woke up each morning excited about what I was building. The success felt surreal sometimes. I'd catch glimpses of myself in store windows, this confident businesswoman in tailored clothes, and remember the girl who used to hide in the library to avoid her family's disappointment. I'd built a life that was everything I'd dreamed of, and nothing my family had thought I was capable of achieving. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, Dennis's business was falling apart. I learned this not because I was keeping tabs on him, but because mutual acquaintances from Cleveland would occasionally reach out through social media, usually with some variation of, "Did you hear about your brother's company?" The investors who'd been so impressed by his presentation had pulled their funding after 18 months of poor performance and missed targets. Turns out that stealing someone's research doesn't automatically give you the skills to execute their vision. Dennis had focused on impressing clients with expensive marketing and flashy packaging, while ignoring the operational details that actually made a business sustainable. The eco-friendly art supply market he'd entered was more competitive than my original research had indicated, and without understanding the nuances of manufacturing and supply chain management, he'd made costly mistakes that ate through his funding. His products were overpriced and unreliable. Customer complaints mounted. Key employees quit. The business was hemorrhaging money with no path to profitability. Mom's health issues had returned, more serious this time. She needed surgery and expensive treatments that her insurance only partially covered. The medical bills were mounting, and her savings were depleted. Dennis, dealing with his own financial crisis as his business collapsed, couldn't help her the way she needed. The first contact I'd had with either of them in 3 years came on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I was in a meeting with my lead designer when my assistant knocked on the conference room door. "Linda, sorry to interrupt, but you have a phone call. The person says he's your brother, and it's urgent." I excused myself and took the call in my office, my heart racing despite myself. "Hello? Linda! God, it's good to hear your voice. How are you doing out there?" Dennis's voice was artificially cheerful, but I could hear the strain underneath. "I'm fine, Dennis. What do you want?" "Can't I just call to check on my sister? It's been way too long since we talked." "You called because you need something. What is it?" There was a long pause. "Look, I know things ended badly between us, and I take responsibility for that. But I'm in a tough spot right now, business-wise, and I thought maybe you could give me some advice. You've obviously figured out something I haven't. Business advice. From the sister he'd called unqualified and incapable. Dennis, I'm very busy. If you have specific questions, you can email them to me. Linda, please. I know I screwed up before, but we're family. Can't we put the past behind us and help each other out? Help each other out. As if he had something to offer me. I'll consider answering specific questions if you email them, but I'm not interested in a broader conversation about business strategy. I have to go. I hung up feeling oddly empty. 3 years ago, getting a call from Dennis acknowledging that I'd succeeded would have meant everything to me. Now it just felt like another manipulation attempt. The second contact came a week later, this time from Mom. Her voicemail was longer, more emotional. Linda, honey, it's Mom. I know we haven't talked in a long time, and I know things were said that hurt everyone involved. But I need to talk to you about something important. It's about my health and about some financial difficulties I'm having. Please call me back when you get this. I love you. I stared at my phone for a long time before deleting the message without calling back. I wasn't ready. Maybe I'd never be ready. The third contact was Dennis, showing up at my office unannounced. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant called to say there was a man in the lobby claiming to be my brother and demanding to see me. Security cameras showed Dennis, looking older and more worn than I remembered, arguing with the receptionist. I had security escort him out of the building. Through my office window, I watched him standing on the sidewalk, looking up at the building with an expression I couldn't quite read. Desperation? Anger? Regret? I didn't care enough to find out. That evening, I found a letter slipped under my apartment door. Mom's handwriting, on the flowered stationery she'd always used for important correspondence. My dearest Linda, it began. I know I have no right to ask anything of you after the way things ended between us. I know we hurt you deeply, and I know you have every reason to want nothing to do with us. But I'm writing to you not as someone asking for forgiveness, but as a mother who loves her daughter and needs her help. The letter went on to detail her medical situation, the mounting bills, Dennis's financial struggles, and their growing desperation. It was carefully written to minimize their past treatment of me, while emphasizing their current need. The final paragraph was the most telling. I know you've built something wonderful out there, and I'm so proud of what you've accomplished. You were always stronger than Dennis and I gave you credit for. Please consider helping us, not because we deserve it, but because you're the only one who can. Proud of what I'd accomplished. Strong. After 3 years of radio silence, suddenly, I was the capable one, the successful one, the one they needed. I sat in my beautiful apartment, looking out at the city lights, holding a letter that would have meant everything to me once upon a time. Now it just felt like proof of something I'd already learned. People only value you when they need something from you. I spent 2 weeks thinking about Mom's letter before making any decision. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely, to continue building my life without any connection to the people who dismissed and betrayed me. But another part, the part that remembered loving them despite everything, couldn't quite let go. I decided to meet with Mom, but on my terms. I flew to Cleveland on a Friday afternoon in April, renting a car at the airport instead of asking anyone to pick me up. I didn't go to the house on Maple Street. Instead, I suggested we meet at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory where I could leave whenever I wanted. Mom looked older than I'd expected, frailer. Her hair was completely gray now, and she moved carefully, like someone still recovering from illness. When she saw me walk into the coffee shop, her eyes filled with tears. Linda, you look wonderful. So professional and confident. I'm so proud of you. I sat across from her, noting how she jumped straight to praise and pride, trying to establish positive emotional ground before we discussed why I was there. How are you feeling, Mom? Health-wise, I mean. Better, mostly. The surgery went well, and the doctors are optimistic. But the bills. She trailed off, looking embarrassed. I never thought I'd be in this position at my age, asking my children for help. You're not asking your children for help, Mom. You're asking me for help. There's a difference. She flinched but nodded. You're right. And I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything after the way Dennis and I treated you. So why are you asking? Because you're the only one who can help. Dennis's business failed, Linda. Completely. He's filing for bankruptcy, and he's moved back in with me because he can't afford his own place. The investors sued him for misrepresenting the business potential, and he barely avoided fraud charges. I felt a flicker of satisfaction, then immediately felt guilty for feeling satisfied. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Really? The question surprised me with its directness. I considered lying, giving her the polite response she probably expected. Instead, I decided on honesty. No, not really. Dennis built that business on stolen ideas and treated me like I was worthless in the process. I'm not glad he's suffering, but I'm not sorry that dishonesty didn't work out for him. Mom nodded slowly. That's fair, I suppose. Linda, I need you to know that I realize now how wrong we were. Not just about the business, but about everything. The way we treated you your whole life, the way we dismissed your abilities, the way we made you feel like you didn't belong in your own family. What changed your mind? My success? The fact that you need money? Maybe that's part of it, she admitted. But mostly it's watching Dennis fall apart and realizing that all the qualities I thought made him superior, confidence, charm, networking ability, they're nothing without substance underneath. You had the substance all along. We were just too blind to see it. I sat quietly, processing her words. This was the acknowledgement I'd craved for years, the validation I desperately wanted. But now, hearing it, I realized it didn't heal the wounds the way I'd once imagined it would. Mom, I appreciate you saying that. But where was this realization 3 years ago when I needed support? Where was it when Dennis was stealing my work and you were nodding along with his justifications? I don't know, she said quietly. I think I was scared of admitting I'd been wrong about so many things for so long. It was easier to believe Dennis's version of events than to face the fact that I'd failed you as a mother. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Finally, I spoke. What exactly are you asking me for? Help with the medical bills. A loan, not a gift. I'll pay you back somehow, even if it takes the rest of my life. And Dennis? I'm not asking you to help Dennis. He's an adult who made his own choices and has to live with the consequences. But I'm asking you to help me, your mother, who loves you and who realizes now how precious you are. I looked at this woman who'd given birth to me, raised me, and broken my heart. She looked genuinely remorseful, genuinely frightened about her situation. But I also knew that if my business failed tomorrow, if I lost everything and needed help, she wouldn't be there for me. Her love was conditional on my success, just like it had always been conditional on my ability to measure up to Dennis. I'll help with your medical bills, I said finally. But not as a loan, as a gift, with no expectation of repayment. Her relief was visible. Linda, thank you. You don't know what this means to me. But I have conditions. I don't want a relationship with Dennis. I don't want him to know the money came from me. And I don't want you to interpret my financial help as forgiveness, or as an invitation to rebuild our relationship. I'm helping you because you're sick, and I'm not cruel enough to let you suffer when I can prevent it. That's all. She looked hurt but nodded. I understand. I also want you to understand something about me, Mom. I didn't succeed despite your rejection. I succeeded because of it, being forced to rely entirely on myself. To build something from nothing without any safety net or family support, that made me stronger than I ever would have been otherwise. So in a weird way, I should thank you. Linda, I'm not angry anymore, Mom. I'm not hurt anymore. I'm just indifferent. You and Dennis are strangers to me now, people I used to know who made choices that pushed me out of their lives. I've built a new life with people who value me for who I am, not for what I can do for them. I stood to leave, and she grabbed my hand. Is there any chance we could try again? Start over somehow? I looked down at her, this small, aging woman who'd once held so much power over my sense of self-worth. I don't think so, Mom. Too much has happened, and too much time has passed. But I hope you recover fully from your surgery, and I hope you find peace. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling lighter than I had in years. I'd helped someone who needed help, set clear boundaries, and closed a chapter of my life that had been weighing me down for too long. Dennis tried to contact me twice more after that, once through social media, and once by showing up at one of my retail partners in Portland. Both times, I had my assistant send a message making it clear that I wanted no contact with him. Eventually, he stopped trying. I never heard from Mom again after I sent the check to cover her medical bills. I hoped she was healthy and happy, but I didn't need to know. That part of my life was finished. and I was free to focus entirely on the future I was building. Standing in my office 6 months later, looking out at the city where I'd rebuilt my life from nothing, I realized something profound. The people who'd tried to convince me I was worthless had actually given me the greatest gift possible. They'd forced me to discover my own worth, independent of their opinions or approval. And that discovery had made me unstoppable. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had family members who underestimated you or tried to take credit for your work? How did you handle it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal and building success on your own terms. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by how others treat them. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply living so well that their opinions become irrelevant. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that every ending can become a new beginning if you're brave enough to walk away from what's holding you back. Until next time, keep building the life you deserve.